All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and thanks for joining me today for What are POAMs? Guidelines and Best Practices for Compliance Success. So before I dive into the formal presentation, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. Today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. However, a number of folks have submitted questions prior to today's session. I've got those on a slide, and I'll cover those at the end. I've also got a colleague on the line with me. You can submit a question via the chat feature at any time, and my colleague will answer those as they come in. If for some reason we do have an outage, you can just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can either do this by refreshing your screen or go to the email invitation that you received for today's webinar and reconnect into the meeting that way as well. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our certification assistant experts, or if you have additional questions really about anything about CMMC or about Exostar, you can reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. You can also come to our website, www.exostar.com, and there's a chat feature there on the various pages, and we'll be able to answer your questions that way as well. Now, if one of your questions is, will you receive the slide deck today? The answer is yes. As a follow-up to today's session, everybody who's registered will get a copy of the slide presentation, as well as a link to a recording of today's presentation as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So this is the agenda I'll be covering today. I'm first going to cover just where we are in the current CMMC rulemaking process. We'll then cover what goes into building out your system security plan, talk about what goes into that NIST 800-171 self-assessment and what's necessary for that. I'll do a demonstration of how to use Certification Assistant to complete that CMMC self-assessment. We'll do a quick review and recap, and then we'll jump into those questions. So where are we in the current rulemaking process? Hopefully, as many of you know, the first major rule, 32 CFR, and CFR stands for the Code of Federal Regulations, went into effect last December 16th of 2024. What this rule did is put in place the CMMC program. It explains it, says different components, puts in further detail, and basically allows the program to get started. The thing we're still waiting for is 48 CFR. That's the acquisition rule, right? So when that comes in, that's when you'll start to see the requirement for CMMC actually start to appear in contracts. So that's what we're currently waiting for to get finalized and be placed into the Code of Federal Regulations. The main things about the CMMC ruling as it is today is it further explains some key terminology, cloud service providers and external service providers. CMMC itself moves from a self-attestation model that we're currently working under to a certified third-party assessment, either done by a C3PA organization or by DBCAC, depending on what level you're trying to achieve. These are those different CMMC levels, and the percentages you see there are the percentage of the defense industrial base that will typically fall into these categories. So the majority of organizations will only be required to reach level 1. That is a self-assessment around 15 requirements that you need to meet to be level 1. You're going to annually self-assess yourself and annually affirm that you do these things. As we go up the chain, right, the number of requirements increase. So in level 2, there's 110 requirements, and those are laid out in NIST 800-171. There's a bifurcation of organizations here. Some, but less than 2%, are going to be allowed a self-assessment. Now, you're not going to be able to request this. This is going to be outlined in the contracts themselves. So when the contracting officer lets the contract or the request for a proposal around the contract, it'll tell you whether or not it's going to allow a self-assessment or a third-party assessment around level 2 if that's the requirement of that particular contract. But the vast majority of level 2 will require that certified third-party assessment organization to do the assessment of your NIST 800-171 controls. That'll need to occur once every 3 years, and the organization will have to annually affirm that they do those things. Level 3 has 134 requirements, right? You got 110 from NIST 800-171, and then there's 24 additional requirements from NIST 800-172. Right. Fewer organizations, right? Less than 1% of the DIB will require this level 3, and that certification will be done once every 3 years as well. But the certification will be done by DIBCAC, not by the C3PO. Now, once that 48 CFR takes effect, the DoD has laid out an implementation phased timeline. It is, as you see here, it's a 3-year phased-in approach. The first year is as it is today. It's going to be a self-assessment for level 1 and level 2. Phase 2 begins after that first year, and that's where the level 2 certifications will start to appear in those solicitations. Then phase 3, you'll start to see the level 3 certification requirements come into play. And then after those 3 years, there'll be a full implementation of the program. Now, obviously, keep in mind that bottom blue box there, where in some procurements, DoD may implement CMMC requirements in advance of these planned phases. So if there are particularly critical contracts, DoD reserves the right to do a faster implementation around those particular contracts. Now, regardless of whether or not CMMC is in place, there are things that you need to be doing today because there already are Defense Federal Acquisition regulations and clauses that say, hey, if you receive CUI, controlled unclassified information, you must protect it in accordance with NIST 800-171. That's the 7012 clause. If you've got a contract with a 7019 clause, that says that you not only you need to protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171, but that you also need to do an annual self-assessment of how you've implemented those controls. That self-assessment is done via the NIST 800-171 Alpha. That's the assessment guide. In that guide, it lays out a point schedule for each of the different controls. So you'll score yourself. You then enter that score into DoD's SPRS system, the Supplier Performance Risk System, and you enter your score to let DoD know how you're doing against the NIST 800-171 standard. If you don't have a control in place, you should have a POAM against it, and you should be working to close that POAM as you've provided the milestone as part of that. Then if you do close a POAM, you should go in and update your score because obviously you've improved it since the last time. And the SPRS system, within that, your score and how you're doing against NIST 800-171 is one of the measures they use as your overall supplier performance risk. Now, when you look to evaluate how you're doing against NIST 800-171, the first thing you've got to develop is a system security plan. And as part of that, what you'll want to do is to define how controlled unclassified information flows through your organization. What systems touch it? What parts of your network are inclusive of those different systems? What individuals in your organization interact with that data? How's it stored? How's it processed? How's it transmitted both to you, across your organization, and possibly to external parties? Who supports those different systems and places? And where are those different things located? This is going to define the system boundary that you need to ensure that you're in control of and that you have those 110 controls in place for. Now, along with that data, you're going to further define that system boundary. You really should draw these things out, right? Because when you start to build that overall assessment, and when you start to engage that certified third-party assessment organization, they're going to ask you, what is your system boundary? What's inclusive of your CUI data flow? What are the different assets that are part of that? And those assets are broken down into the categories you see here. There are the CUI assets. These are those things that store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information. There are security protection assets. These things, they don't store or process or transmit CUI, but they're there to gate it or keep it under control. These are things like firewalls. It may actually be a locked door or a locked file cabinet or something like that. Those are the things that are protecting that CUI. You may also have third parties as part of your overall organization, and they may be managing certain parts of your network. They may be providing core services to your organization, and they may be managing those different pieces of it. This is typically where you start to talk about an external service provider. These are often those managed service providers or those managed security service providers, MSPs or MSSPs, that are either augmenting your organization, fulfilling a function for you, but they are part of your overall CUI data flow, and they may actually have access to that data as well. And then there are certain specialized assets. They may be part of the data flow, but they don't necessarily store or process. They may you may use CNC machines, cutting machines, CAD/CAM systems, etc., that you may plug in information from or manipulate the data in some way. And those things are typically those specialized assets. Those things you need to account for. You need to understand how they're protected and what part of your system they are part of. And then there are certain things in, on your premise outside of the scope of this. Those things should be noted. You should be able to clarify why they're not part of the scope. But this is going to define your overall system diagram and boundary as you put it into your system security plan. You're then going to want to go through each of the different NIST 800-171 categories, right? These are those 14 control families with 110 controls within each of these. And then within each of these, there are what are called determine if statements. These are the 330 individual items that make up the NIST 800-171 R2. Now, we call out R2, right? Rev 2 of NIST 800-171, because that is the NIST 800-171 revision that DoD calls out as part of CMMC. There is a Rev 3 on the street. NIST has developed it. It's been passed. It is there, but DoD hasn't implemented that. So when we talk about CMMC and which version of NIST 800-171 it affects for the DoD, we're talking about Rev 2. Now, as you go through each of these different controls, as part of the assessment guide, it's going to lay out what are called these assessment objectives. So this is an example of one of those. This is taken straight from that 171 alpha for this particular requirement 3.1.3, right? Control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. To do this, right, you should be able to say how you control or the information flow control policies you have defined. What methods and enforcement mechanisms for controlling the flow of CUR are defined. So your implementation statements, how you do these things, should be able to answer these different questions, because that's what the assessors are going to take a look at when they come on site. So when you evaluate whether or not you've implemented a particular control, you should look to these to say, yep, I've got that in place. Yes, I do that. Yes, I do that. And then you can mark it as implemented. And you need evidence to support that you actually do these things. So do I have an implementation statement that says how I do this? Do I have evidence that I've actually done those things? Are my people trained to actually do this? Because the assessor may actually say, well, okay, when a new person joins your organization, how do you grant them access if they're part of that CUI data flow? And they may want to ask the individual responsible for that, how they go about doing it. And then they'll check to see if they're following the policies and procedures that you have in place that do that. And then periodically, you should take a look at your policies and procedures and make sure that they're still relevant. You haven't changed technologies in any way that might change the way you do things. Now, when you determine whether or not or kind of where you are in the overall SSP and whether or not you've implemented a particular control, then you need to score yourself, right? As we mentioned, you many times today, or if you've got that 7019 clause, you've got to update your SPRS score. And the way you do that is you're going to go through each of the 110 controls. If you've implemented a particular control, it's worth 1, 3, or 5 points. If you haven't implemented that control, it's a -1, 3, or -5. So that's why your score for the SPRS to enter into the SPRS system will range somewhere from a -203 to 110. Now, when we talk about POAMs, plans of action and milestones, that's what you start if you haven't implemented a particular control. Now, when the assessors come on site, right, when you've engaged with that certified third-party assessment organization, and they go through the checklist, and maybe you say, you know, hey, this is how I implement this control, and maybe your assessor says, well, you say you do that, but we talk to your people and you don't actually do that. You do it this way, or, well, that control is not quite good enough, or, oh, by the way, you don't actually have that control done yet. That it could be okay, and it could be the assessor will say, okay, let's open a POAM against that. But they're only going to allow you to do that for those POAMs that are worth 1 point. And the asterisk there, is because only certain 1-point POAMs are actually allowed to occur. This is for that third-party assessment organization. If you're doing an initial assessment and you've got a 5-point control that you haven't implemented yet, you absolutely should still go ahead and open a POAM against that. You should then work to close that, because that'll let you know that you shouldn't engage with that C3PA organization to do your assessment until you've actually got those things closed. If for some reason, when that third-party assessment comes on, if it is one of those allowed 1-point controls, you're going to have 180 days to close that control before, and then they're going to come out and reassess you. As I mentioned, you're going to get this slide deck. So this has laid out those different points. And, those are all, as you see here, these are the 5-point controls. These are the 3-point controls. And there's a link here to the assessment guide, so you can work through those. So these are the 1-point controls that if the assessor's there and you haven't done some of these are worth 1 point. However, these are not POAMable, if you will, by the assessment organizations, right? By the C3POs. If you don't do these things, you should not engage with that certified third-party assessment until you have these things in place. Now, to close out those POAMs, and again, this is for that third-party assessment organization. You've got 180 to close that. If if you close out that POAM that was found during your assessment, you close it out within 180 days, then you go back to that same assessment organization and say, okay, we're ready. We've done what you've asked. This is now in place. They'll come out, they'll reassess that control. They'll then say, okay, yep, you're right, it's good. And then you'll be passed, right? Then you'll have that certified third-party assessment completed. You'll have passed it. You'll get updated in the EMAS system with that as done and you as a pass. Now, if you're trying to reach level 3 certification, all of this is going to be done by DIBCAC. Same rules apply, right? If DIBCAC finds a control that you haven't quite implemented correctly or not yet, you'll have a POAM opened against that. You'll have 180 days to close it, and DIBCAC will be the ones that do that closeout of the assessment. So whoever initially was doing the assessment, you'll re-engage with that same organization to close out anything that might have been found during the assessment. But again, all of this is if the assessment was going on. If you haven't yet engaged with that third party, then if you don't have a control in place, you should still use the POAM process to manage your overall CMMC program. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is. It is a program that you need to keep updated, keep abreast of throughout the year. And even this isn't just a once every 3-year thing or a once, let me get my certification and go. It is an ongoing program and process. And Exostar has a number of applications that can help you out during this process. And the one we're going to talk about explicitly today, and I'll demonstrate it here in just a minute, is Exostar's Certification Assistant. It is an application that allows you to walk through those 110 controls, lay out your system boundary, your network diagrams, etc. Create those POAMs as you go through to help you manage that overall CMMC assessment program. So with that, let me go ahead and dive in and show you what this looks like. Oops, sorry about that. So this is a SaaS application. Wrong one. Hold on a minute. Let me get to the right application here. There we go. There we go. So Exostar Certification Assistant is a SaaS application that will be updated and is maintained by Exostar. You get a subscription into it, and it allows you, as I mentioned before, to manage that overall CMMC program. As you come into the system, this is going to start to self-populate as I build out both the evidence of how my organization is doing something, but also allows me to put in the information about my organization, my system, and then the various practices. And then this is going to start to populate the dashboard for me, so I know how I'm doing, right? So I know that currently my SPRS score is 32, right? So I've still got a long way to go. And as part of closing out, or improving this score, I've created POAMs as I've gone along, and I'm going to, close out these POAMs by addressing these controls that I don't yet have in place, improving my overall score, and updating the evidence, the info, etc. So when I first come in, right, none of this is going to be populated. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is define my organization and the system information that I need to be able to provide both my organization and the certified third parties when I'm ready for that point to say, okay, this is my overall system and the boundary. So, right, I've put in my organization name, my address, who owns my system, what contact information do I have around those, additional point of contacts, etc. Because we're talking about a system security plan, we need to define the boundaries of that overall system. So I've started to upload, right, the network diagram, the system boundary diagram, the data flow diagrams, etc., to build my evidence that I have, and to also define this for that C3PA organization. I'm also using cloud services, right? I'm using Exostar's managed Microsoft 365. It's an application where I store, process, and transmit CUI. I share it out with my third parties, etc. As part of that, I most likely got a shared responsibility matrix that explains both to me and to those third parties what these external systems do, or what this cloud service does, what responsibilities the cloud service provider is covering as part of their system. I'm putting that in here as a leverage system because I'm using that to augment my overall organization. I'm representing that in my boundaries and in my in my diagrams. And I'll show you, kind of an idea of how you might want to account that for those shared responsibilities in your in your processes and procedures as well. So once we've defined that overall system, we're then going to go into each of the individual practices and start to populate those with our implementation statements and all those things. Right. So that's, again, it's reachable from the dashboard. We can also, jump to these different things, etc. So I can either, dive into the practices and start to go down each one of these. So, if I'm first starting out, I'm going to go ahead and just, go to the first practice. I'm going to determine whether or not I'm doing this thing and how I'm doing it. Right. So in this case, this is inherited. This is in the shared responsibility matrix, right, that I receive from my inherited system, or my leverage system, I guess I should say. I've inherited this control. It's implemented, and we've concluded this particular, practice. I can then jump to another one, or I could go to POAMs that I have that I'm looking to close out. So, I as one of my, on the dashboard, one of the practices that I have a POAM against, I believe is 3.2.3. Let me look down here. Yeah, so I've got 3.2.3 awareness and training, right? It's not started yet. I've got it unassigned right now, but I'm going to go ahead and address this one, right? So I'm going to look at this particular task. It says I need to, write the controls around this, create a security awareness training program, know the implementation statements around those as well. So we went ahead and we wrote that out. I wrote it out in Word. What we're doing about it, this is the insider threat training around 3.2.3. Both what my partner does, right? This is the Exostar's Managed Microsoft 365. It's a shared responsibility. This is what Exostar does. This is what I'm going to do. And this is the implementation statement I wrote about it, right? I work for a company called Glory Minerals, and this is what we're going to do about it. So because of that, I'm going to, jump back into my application. I could go into the practices. I can jump to the 3.2.3. I can jump to, go to 3.2. So insider threat awareness, what are we going to do? So how are we implementing this particular statement? So I'm just going to do a cut and paste. In here, we did the naming convention of if I'm doing this, I've got it in, in various brackets and things like that. I do that. And I'm going to paste this in. So this is how we're going to implement this particular control. This is our implementation statement, our reporting, how we're going to do the violations. If I needed some additional information, or if I wanted to make sure I'm doing all these things right, the help is here in the application, right? In what an insider threat is, what do I need to account for? What questions the assessors and things like that are going to ask me. What do I need to consider? Do training materials include these different things? These are my assessment objectives. So all these things are part of the explanation to help me ensure that I've got the right implementation statement. So I'm now going to mark this as implemented. We do these things. I've got the policy statement around it. I'm going to move this from practice review from not started to concluded. Now that I've implemented this particular practice, my dashboard should be updated. I could then also go to the POAM itself and close out that POAM as well. So we've updated this. We moved from 32 to 33. We've improved our SPRS score. We've closed out a particular POAM, right? So all of this is that way you manage that overall CMMC program. Keep it updated. Now, when we want to go and engage with that third-party assessment organization, they're going to ask us as part, once we've agreed to the engagement, they're going to want to see my evidence, my documentation, etc. Well, Certification Assistant allows you to centralize that information here under one umbrella, then get that information out when you're ready to provide it to that C3PAO, so you can then provide that information. And that's all here, right, under the evidence and documentation. So as I go through and I upload my different evidence or the, to show that I'm doing a particular control, I can create that file library of all of that evidence. I can download all of this evidence and provide it to that 3PA organization, right? This also includes those diagrams that I've uploaded as part of it when I was laying out that system. It's also going to generate for me that overall system security plan. So I get a system security plan, right? The output, if you will, of Certification Assistant is that system security plan. It's that evidence list, again, that I can download and provide to that 3PAO. I've got the document of just NIST 800-171 as well. Maybe somebody wants just how I'm doing against NIST 800-171. I've also got my current POAMs and how I'm doing against those. So we're also keeping track of all that additional documentation that you may need to download and show others, provide lists, etc. as well. So we're centralizing all that information to you. We're giving you feedback as you keep this program up and running and keep it documented as you go through. So hopefully what you saw today was a way to manage that overall CMMC program, centralize all that information in a SaaS application, allow your organization to keep up to date. And as a SaaS application, as the CMMC guidelines evolve, as requirements come into play and change, as we know, right? NIST 800-171 itself is evolving. As I talked about, there is a Rev 3, that DoD will adopt at some time. At that time, Exostar, as a SaaS provider, will update the program to support Rev 3. Wherever we can, we'll ensure that that information, kind of moves smoothly over from Rev 2 to Rev 3. Because as we see, when you look at it, things are close, but they're not quite the same. Some controls are under different families and things like that. So we'll do that as part of the overall update to the application itself. Now, this particular application is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. Along with Certification Assistant, we have an application called Policy Pro, which can help you create those 14 policies around those 14 control families. This provides templates for each of those different control families. You can then customize those templates to fit your particular organization. If you've already developed policies as part of maybe an ISO standard that you had worked on earlier, developed, you can feed those policies directly into Policy Pro, or the ones you take from templates and customize for you. There's an AI engine within Policy Pro, which allows you to run those policies and procedures through it. You'll get feedback on those written policies in the form of what's called key elements not included, or a KENI. It will list those out for you, give you information and hints to ways to improve those and where you might go for additional information if you don't quite understand what that particular control is trying to get in place. Then, as I mentioned before, Exostar has a place to store, process, and transmit that controlled unclassified information. That's our managed Microsoft 365 solution. This is a Teams environment up in Microsoft's GCC High, managed and supported by Exostar, with an Exostar application embedded within the Teams environment to put those guardrails in place to ensure that everything is set up in a deny by default manner. Everything has the guardrails in place to ensure the information is maintained and kept within that secure enclave. Users access this via the web browser. Those guardrails ensure that the information stays in place and has the necessary controls in place to meet 85 of those 110 controls within that particular enclave. We also partner with a number of organizations out there. These are services organizations, RPOs, and C3PAOs that are part of the Cyber AB community. These folks work with the Exostar SaaS applications to deliver various kinds of CMMC assessments. These can be readiness assessments, gap assessments, full suites of services wrapped around getting ready for CMMC, all the way to having C3PA organizations that you can engage with to when you're ready for that particular assessment step. Now, I'm going to ask my colleague Doe to go ahead and put up the poll about how we did today. Now, we appreciate your feedback in here, not just on kind of how we did today, but we also asked for some suggestions on other information you might want to take a look at. Exostar offers a number of webinars throughout the month, including general CMMC topics, product workshops and samples like we did today, as well as other various topics. So love to get your feedback on what you'd like to see so we can better serve the overall community. As I mentioned, we did get some questions coming in about the application and CMMC itself, so I'm going to answer those. And hopefully you guys all submitted some questions to my colleague as well, and he's able to answer those. So the first one. So the last guidance that I've received from the Prime is that they were awaiting guidance from the government regarding the final ruling. Therefore, I'm still unsure of what the guidance is right now. So hopefully in my little intro about the current state of CMMC, I was able to answer that question there. But just as a recap, so CMMC, though a program, and you can start to get those CMMC assessments completed and receive that certification, it's not yet in DoD contracts. We're still waiting for that final regulation, that part, or the Part 48 CFR to be implemented before this actually starts to show up in DoD contracts. However, you can start to get ready in anticipation of that. There are, as I mentioned before, requirements in place today that require you to meet NIST 800-171 requirements to protect and control controlled unclassified information. So number two, I didn't quite understand. It basically just said, do you encrypt the POAM? So, if this is within Exostar applications, all information is encrypted, both at rest and in transit. So within Certification Assistant, the data about POAMs is encrypted. If this is about encryption or general encryption, right? The broad guidance of NIST 800-171 is that data at rest or in transit needs to be encrypted, and it needs to be encrypted with FIPS 140-2 encryption algorithms. So number three, only 1-point controls can have POAMs. If you have already listed the 1, 3, and 5-point controls, please do so here. So I'm not going to list them out here. However, in my presentation, I do list those out. So, and you'll be receiving this presentation as part of the follow-up. So you should have those there. The 1-point controls are all those that aren't 1, 3, or 5. And you should be able to also find those in the assessment guide, and the link to the assessment guide is there. I also do want to further clarify, right? You can have POAMs during your self-assessment, regardless of whether or not they're 1, 3, or 5 points. That no POAMs, or only 1-point controls can have POAMs is, really comes into play when it's that C3PAO or DIBCAC assessors. During their assessment process, they're going to allow those 1-point controls, and it's a subset of all the 1-point controls, but they're going to allow that and still continue the assessment. They'll note it, they'll have you create a POAM against it, you'll close that POAM in 180 days. If you have a 3 or a 5-point, or one of those unallowed one-point controls, the assessment organization is going to stop the assessment. They're not going to be able to complete the assessment at that time until you close out that 1, 3, or 5-point control. Then when you've done that, you're going to re-engage with them. So I just wanted to further clarify that. Number 4, please provide clarification on the rule regarding mobile devices. If the CUI can be containerized, does the need exist to make the mobile device a managed device? Case would be where email can be accessed through any device via MFA. IT could not possibly manage a personal device, and therefore the need exists to have the devices unmanaged. Which requirement provides an exemption for this? So as far as I know, there's no requirement that provides an exemption for this. Mobile devices can be managed. And if you're going to put CUI on those devices, they typically need to be managed devices. So I don't know of any way to not enforce or any controls or requirement that allows you to exempt mobile devices from this. If you're going to allow your users to access their email that may have CUI on a mobile device, then most likely you need to manage that device. And mobile devices, there is MDM software to have managed, mobile devices. So I probably didn't clarify that the way you wanted to, but that's the way I read the rule. This is just me, and my opinion, is just that. But that's the way I read the rule and I interpret the rule. So please, please look to your ESP and or your external service provider, your IT organization, etc. They may have a different interpretation, but like I said, that's my interpretation of it. So realistically, how many POA&M items can be carried on a register? Well, realistically, all of them can be. You could have a POA&M open against every item if you haven't yet, you may know you do something, but you haven't written up how you actually do that yet. You would need a POA&M against that to write up your implementation statement and gather your evidence about that particular control. So realistically, every control can have a POA&M against it, and those all should be carried on a register so you understand kind of where you are today and what you need to close. Number 6, what is a realistic budget required for a small company to comply with CMMC in middle and long term? I wish I had a better answer for this because I know this is somewhat frustrating to everybody, but it depends. Part of it's going to depend on kind of what you currently have in place and where you need to get to. The other thing is going to be the kind of organization you are and how much of your organization is involved in, kind of DoD contracting and that overall CUI data flow. Now, if you look at CMMC rulemaking and the whole process to come, kind of get to this space, there was quite an in-depth study of what a particular organization should be budgeting and what they, kind of what that annual looks for small, medium-sized businesses. I don't have that memorized. That was a huge section of part of the overall rulemaking process. So it is there, and you can certainly take a look at it there. But what I will say is, the DoD's position for a long time has been that, look, CMMC isn't new. The certification process is new, and this requirement to have the certified third-party assessment is new. However, for many years now, organizations have agreed to contracts that say, hey, if I receive controlled unclassified information, I'm going to protect it in accordance with NIST 800-171. Those rules have been in place for over 10 years now, and you should have already been working toward those things, and you should already have those controls in place. CMMC, again, the only new thing about CMMC is that it now requires this third-party assessment. That is an additional cost, right? It didn't require it before. Once every 3 years, you're going to need this third-party assessment. Everything else is pretty much status quo. So, like I said, I wish I had a better answer for you and could give you a hard number that's, hey, if you're this size organization, you're going to require this. But I can't, because every organization is a little different. Every organization has a different starting point and a different ending point. So hopefully everybody today was helpful for you. Hopefully this answered any questions you might have. If not, please reach out to us via email, via our website, providing some additional information for you here as well, just to help you do some self-discovery, build your knowledge base about these things. So I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. I want to thank you all for joining me. Have a great day and a great rest of the week. Thanks very much.